peace or violence? Which is it? Raise your hand if it's an action of peace. Okay, we got two. We got two. Raise your hand if it's an action of violence.
Are you asking just for Christianity?
Oh, no, I'm kind of arguing for an overall definition of religion. Or is it a little bit too hard? Should I break it down to Christianity?
Yes.
All right. Is Christianity a movement towards peace? We got one. Or is Christianity a movement towards violence? Raise your hand. Come on, be brave.
I get to vote twice.
Wow. So both. You're for both and.
Yeah. Is there a third possibility?
Yeah, give us a third possibility.
Well, I really don't believe in the binaries.
Yeah.
And if one really looks at any religion out there, it's very difficult to talk in the categories of binaries. Christianity is one of them, Islam, depending which historical period of Islam one looks.
Right.
It has a very, very different accomplishments, approaches.
Right.
So binaries really, particularly when it comes to, that's what I got interested in your presentation, the connection of nationalism and religion.
Yeah.
That's exactly what nationalism is trying to do, is to reduce us to these binaries that exclude everything else.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that there is the third, the fourth, and the 10th possibility of
Yeah, we only have an hour and a half. Yeah, that's good. I think you're right. Well, let's get into the lecture that I was going to present, and begin to think about nationalism, the rise of white religious nationalism. And this is really based on an article that is recent in the literature. So it's not one that I did in particular. So, but I think it's a very interesting one. And what they wanted to test for is what were the features of those who voted for Trump? And are these features a form of religion? Do they believe in a form of religious nationalism? So that's what I'm going to present to you. And so you can kind of adjudicate it for yourself. And in the process of doing that, we'll see whether religion is being used for peace or violence or both and, which I think is an appropriate third or fourth or fifth option. Okay? Whoops. All right, so the sources come from Make America Christian Again, Christian Nationalism Voting for Donald Trump in the 2016 presidential election. Some work I've looked at in Southern Poverty Center. David Leonhardt's It is Complicated, Trump Encourages Violence. Philip Borsky's American Covenant, The History of Civil Religion from the Puritans to the Present, published just recently. Great book. So, thesis. The data from a national probability sample of Americans surveyed soon after the 2016 election shows that greater adherence to Christian nationalist ideology was a robust predictor for voting for Trump. Okay, so what they did was they took a series of beliefs that they talked about as a Christian nationalist ideology. And then they tested that as to whether those who voted for Trump believed in those specific beliefs. Even after controlling for economic dissatisfaction, sexism, anti-black prejudice, anti-Muslim refugee attitudes, anti-immigrant sentiment, as well as measures of religion, socio-demographics, and political identity more generally. These findings indicate that Christian nationalist ideology, although correlated with a variety of class-based, sexist, racist, and ethnocentric views, is not synonymous with or reducible or strictly epiphenomenal of such views. Okay? In other words, there's a correlation between the two. Yes,
Can you explain what the Christian nationalist ideology is?
I'm about to. Yeah. So that's Christian nationalism operates as a unique, independent ideology. That is okay? So it is independent ideology, that is, it has a causal value. All right? It is not a dependent variable. It can influence political actions by calling forth a defense of a mythological narrative, right, about America's distinctively Christian heritage and future. So this is civil religion. This is, and really more a national religion that is being talked about as an ideology that is the thesis of the study. So that's the question. What is the backbone of support for Donald Trump? Many assume it represents a defense of America's supposed Christian heritage in the eyes of many Americans. Okay? Many assume it's so. So the question is, who supports Trump? Is it a form of white nationalism? And if they do, why do they? Okay, so the argument is this: a pervasive set of beliefs and ideals that merge America and Christian group memberships, along with their histories and futures, as a form of Christian nationalism. That's what we're talking about. All right? So every country has a form of nationalism. And so the question here is, what is pushing, and a lot of people ask that question. The question is, why did people vote for Trump, right? I mean, it didn't, who has asked that question? Raise your hand if you asked that question yourself. Yeah, the whole class has, right? I don't know about you, on election night, I wasn't in total shock, but when Florida went for Trump, I knew it was over, right? And it was, I have to say I was a little shocked. So, study draws on data from a probability sample of American adult survey soon after the November 16th election that included a question about vote choice. As a result, we were able to more thoroughly examine if and how Christian nationalism, along with other factors, predicts actual voting outcomes. All right? Because the data also contains measures for attitudes towards women, gender issues, African Americans, Muslims, immigrants, and economic dissatisfaction, along with a host of other religious and political characteristics. We're better able to discern the independent effects of Christian nationalism. Ensure that it is not merely acting as a proxy for other forms of intolerance, traditionalism, or religious and political variables known to be related to vote choice. Okay, in other words, they wanted to specify, is Christian nationalism really the action and belief system that they believe in, or was this a proxy or a substitute, okay, for something else? That was the question. Okay, so what the predictors, what they found was there were 5 predictors of Trump support that were significant statistically. And I would imagine that this is not shocking. White working class economic anxieties. Yeah. Misogyny, that is some form of dislike or hatred towards women. Anti-black prejudice, which I'm sure you're not surprised by. Fear of Islamic terrorism, which not surprising. Xenophobia, that is, and I think this is a critical variable, deep distrust of immigration, immigrants, anyone coming that's not native. What they would say, native to the country. Yeah, you caught me there, didn't you? Can't use that word. That's interesting, isn't it? It's the first time I thought of using that word inappropriately, right? So it's a perfect place to do this and talk about this. Talk about this article. Civil religion. All right. Typically, and I want to distinguish civil religion from nationalism. All right. This is kind of a, you might argue, and I think you could argue, is every state nation, often you would argue, there's some countries, maybe not, but every country has some form of civil religion, no matter how thin or thick it is. And it often is the glue or the ideology that creates the form of nationalism that we talk about when we talk about nationalism. So the question was, is this form of white Christian nationalism merely a civil religion? Okay? Is it merely a civil religion? That is it merely the narrative of an origin myth of the country, which we talk about? It used to be, right? We used to be propagandized that the Pilgrims came to the country, Thanksgiving was celebrated, and we discovered America, right? I mean, that's just the doctrine of discovery in mythological language, yes? And that we used to celebrate. I mean, in my elementary school, we used to play Pilgrims. Okay? Did anybody do that? Yeah? I mean, it's just, okay. Yeah, it's hard to even think about. But this civil religion really refers to specific religious, This civil religion really refers to specific religious figures, Moses and Judas. And the most famous, not the beginnings of civil religion, but one of the famous proclamations of American civil religion, and this is an interesting book to read, is Will Herberg's book, Protestant Catholic Jew, 1955. Very significant book. Why do you think that is? Very significant book. Why would that be? Has it always been the case that America was a Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish nation? Yeah? Tell me what? Tell me what?
There was distrust of Catholics and obviously anti-Semitism. So that's kind of a post-war dominance sort of restatement.
Yeah. And it has the overtone of colonial features. But it was very powerful, non-sectarian. It was kind of our Americanism. We had faith in faith. And we'd often say in those times, it doesn't matter what your religion is, just believe in God. Now but this God would be either God of Protestants, Catholic, or Jews, right? And so Eisenhower said, it was famous, President Eisenhower in the 1950s, says, I don't care what religion you are, just say you believe in God. Yeah. So this faith in America often covered the discrimination that was going on against Catholics or against Jews or against...
We added under God to the national pledge, which I have refused.
You've refused, yeah, good for you. Right. What was that 1980? Was that?
No, that was Eisenhower.
Was it?
Eisenhower.
Was Eisenhower? Yeah, sorry. Yeah.